They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I never understood that saying until the day I stood in my empty apartment, watching my husband's family scramble to figure out how they'd survive without the woman they'd spent 13 years treating like hired help. My name is Emily Jenkins, and this is the story of how I went from doormat to destroyer, one calculated move at a time. I used to think I was living the American dream. At 40, I had a successful career as a pharmacist, a spacious apartment in Manhattan's Upper East Side, and what everyone called a stable marriage. The reality was far more complicated than the polished surface I presented to the world. Mark Miller had seemed like a catch when I met him 14 years ago. A divorced father with a teenage son, he carried himself with the confidence of a middle management executive. He was charming during our courtship, painting pictures of blended family happiness. What he failed to mention was that his mother Eleanor had never accepted his divorce and had been plotting his ex-wife's replacement from day one. The first sign of trouble came during our engagement party. Eleanor introduced me to her friends as Mark's little girlfriend and spent the evening telling anyone who would listen about how much prettier and more accomplished his ex-wife had been. When I tried to join conversations, she'd literally turn her back to me or suddenly remember an urgent task that required my immediate attention in the kitchen. Our wedding was a small affair. Eleanor wore black, citing a migraine. She spent the reception telling relatives about Mark's real wedding to his first wife. Jake, then 10 years old, refused to wear the boutonniere I'd selected and spent the entire evening asking when we were going home to real mom. The honeymoon period ended approximately 72 hours after we returned from Napa Valley. Eleanor had redecorated our living room, replacing the warm colors I'd chosen with her preferred beiges and browns. When I gently suggested we might change things back, she fixed me with a stare that could have frozen hell and said, "This is still my son's home, dear. You're just living in it." That became the theme of our relationship. I was just living in someone else's life, tolerated but never welcomed, useful but never valued. The financial abuse started slowly. Mark began asking me to contribute more to household expenses, claiming his promotion was delayed. What he didn't tell me was that he'd actually been demoted and was making significantly less than when we'd married. When I confronted him after accidentally seeing his actual salary, he became defensive, accusing me of snooping and making him feel like less of a man. I took over the apartment lease, putting my name on it while shouldering the entire rent. That was my first mistake in a marriage full of them. By securing their housing while ensuring I'd have no protection if things went wrong, I'd become their financial safety net without gaining any security for myself. As years passed, requests for financial help became demands. Eleanor needed money for mysterious medical bills. Jake needed gaming systems, designer clothes, a car, and eventually private college tuition. Mark needed suits, golf memberships, and weekend trips with colleagues I was never invited to join. I paid for it all because I believed generosity would eventually earn me a place at their table. Instead, it taught them I was an endless resource to be mined rather than a person to be respected. The emotional abuse was subtle but devastating. Eleanor had a gift for cutting remarks disguised as caring. "Oh, Emily, bless your heart. You're trying so hard to be part of this family. It's sweet, really." She'd bring up Mark's ex-wife whenever I achieved something, always finding ways that first wife had done something similar but better. Jake inherited his grandmother's talent for subtle cruelty. He'd ask Mark for money directly in front of me, as if I wasn't there. He'd introduce me as Mark's wife rather than using my name. When I'd attempt to enforce household rules, he'd smile sweetly and say, "I'll ask Dad about that," undermining any authority I might have claimed. The worst part was how Mark enabled all of it. He'd promise privately to talk to his mother and son about their treatment of me, but those conversations either never happened or accomplished nothing. "They don't mean anything by it," became his standard response. "You're being too sensitive." Gaslighting is insidious. When you're constantly told your perceptions are wrong, you start doubting your own reality. I found myself apologizing for things that weren't my fault and accepting behavior that should have been unacceptable. 5 years ago, Jake graduated college and moved back home with his girlfriend, Chloe. I was excited, thinking another woman in the house might shift dynamics. Chloe quickly aligned herself with Eleanor and Jake, recognizing where power lay in our household hierarchy. She was sweet to my face and dismissive behind my back, joining the family tradition of treating me like expensive hired help. Last month, everything changed in 3 devastating days. It started with an announcement. Jake and Chloe gathered us in the living room with nervous excitement. Chloe was pregnant. Eleanor's joy was overwhelming. She immediately began making plans for converting our home office into a nursery, discussing arrangements as if the baby would live with us permanently. "This changes everything," she said, eyes bright. "We'll need to make room for the real family." The word real hit me like a physical blow. After 13 years, I was still not real family. The next day, Eleanor called me into the kitchen, where she sat with tea and a satisfied smile that sent chills down my spine. "Emily, dear, we need to talk about living arrangements. Jake and Chloe will be moving back when the baby comes." They'll need space, and frankly, we think it would be best if you found somewhere else to live. I stood there, gripping a chair I'd purchased with my own money, in an apartment I'd been paying for, and listened to my mother-in-law evict me from my own home. This is Jake's home, she continued. He grew up here. The baby should grow up here too. You understand, don't you? You've never been able to give Mark children, but now we have a chance for a real grandchild to grow up in this family. Where's Mark? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Oh, he's at work, dear. But we discussed it, and he agrees this is for the best. That night, I waited for Mark to come home. When he finally walked through the door at nearly midnight, I was sitting at our kitchen table with cold coffee. We need to talk, I said. Mark looked uncomfortable, the expression of a man caught in cowardice. Emily, about what Mom said today. You agreed to kick me out of our home. It's not like that. It's temporary, just until Jake and Chloe get settled. This is the apartment I pay for, Mark. My name is on the lease. How exactly did you plan to make me leave? He finally looked at me, and I saw something I'd been refusing to acknowledge for years. He didn't love me anymore. I'm not sure he ever had. The lease is up for renewal next month, he said quietly. We thought maybe you wouldn't renew it. We thought. The pronoun choice was telling. I wasn't part of we. I never had been. That's when my naive faith crumbled. I'd been living with people who saw me as an obstacle to their happiness rather than a contributor to it. They wanted my money but not my presence, my labor but not my love. The final blow came the next evening at Murphy's Pub, where Mark and I used to go for drinks. I needed somewhere with good memories to think clearly. Maria, the bartender who'd worked there for years, approached me hesitantly. Mrs. Miller? I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I've seen your husband here several times with a woman. A blonde woman, younger than you. They seemed close, holding hands, kissing. Last week, I saw them leave together. She had an overnight bag. My blood turned to ice. My husband, the man I'd been supporting for over a decade, was cheating on me. While I was being evicted for not being real family, he was building a relationship with someone else. I drove home slowly, my mind surprisingly clear despite the emotional chaos. By the time I reached our parking garage, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I was done being a victim. The next morning, while Mark was at work and Eleanor was shopping, I made several calls that would reshape all our lives. First, I hired Detective Anna Reed to document everything about Mark's affair and investigate his finances. Then I called Ben Carter, a divorce attorney from college who specialized in high-asset divorces. Emily, I'm sorry you're going through this, but you have more power than you realize. If you've been the primary financial supporter and there's infidelity involved, New York law can be very favorable to you. I also called a moving company and scheduled them for the next day. If Eleanor wanted me out, I'd give her exactly what she asked for. But I wouldn't leave empty-handed. I spent that evening cataloging everything I'd purchased over the years. The living room furniture Eleanor had commandeered? Mine. The kitchen appliances that made their elaborate dinners possible? Mine. The flat-screen television Jake watched sports on? Mine. The bed Mark and I shared? Mine. When Eleanor and Jake returned from shopping with baby supplies purchased on my credit card, I was sitting calmly at the kitchen table. Emily, dear, you look upset, Eleanor said with false concern. You're not still bothered by our conversation yesterday, are you? Actually, I've been thinking about what you said. You're absolutely right. This isn't my home. It never has been. She looked pleased, mistaking my calm tone for acceptance. Which is why I've arranged for movers to come tomorrow morning to collect all of my belongings. Your belongings? Jake asked, looking up from the baby cribs. Everything I've purchased over the years. Furniture, appliances, electronics, linens, dishes, everything. I've kept very good records. Eleanor's face went pale. You can't be serious. This is a family home. Actually, I can. My name is on all the receipts, and New York law is clear about personal property ownership. I smiled with the same sweet, condescending expression she'd been giving me for 13 years. I'm sure you'll understand. After all, you said I was never really part of this family anyway. The next morning, I watched with deep satisfaction as professional movers systematically dismantled the comfortable life I'd unknowingly built for people who despised me. Eleanor and Jake sat on borrowed folding chairs, surrounded by baby supplies that suddenly looked absurd in the empty apartment. The movers took everything: the leather sofa, the dining set where I'd served thousands of meals, the kitchen appliances that had made Eleanor's holiday meals possible, and yes, even Jake's beloved flat-screen television. You're being vindictive, Eleanor hissed. I'm being practical, I replied calmly. You wanted me to leave. I'm leaving, but I'm taking my property with me. Mark returned from his mysterious business trip to find his family sitting in an empty apartment. I was waiting in what used to be our bedroom, sitting on the only remaining piece of furniture, a folding chair. What the hell did you do? He demanded. I gave your family what they wanted, an Emily-free home. I stood slowly, savoring the moment. How was your trip with Jessica, by the way? The color drained from his face. I don't know what you're talking about. I showed him photos Anna Reed had taken. Mark and a blonde woman entering hotels, kissing in lobbies, sharing intimate dinners. Maria at Murphy's has been watching your little romance develop for months. Mark sank to the floor. Emily, I can explain. No need. My attorney has all the evidence he needs. I pulled out Ben's folder. This apartment costs $5,600 a month. I've been paying the entire rent for 5 years while you've been telling your family you're the breadwinner. Your actual salary, after your demotion, is $43,000 a year. Eleanor and Jake had crept to the doorway, listening in growing horror. That's impossible, Eleanor said weakly. Mark makes less than I spend on groceries each month, I said coldly. I've been subsidizing this entire family's lifestyle while being treated like an unwelcome guest. Jake was doing math in his head, his face growing panicked. We can't afford this place without you. No, you can't. The lease is in my name and Mark's, but I'm the only one with the credit score and income to qualify for renewal. As of tomorrow, I'll be notifying the landlord that I won't be renewing when it expires next month. The silence was deafening. 3 people who had spent years making me feel worthless were suddenly faced with the reality of their own worthlessness without me. Eleanor tried one last manipulation. You're upset, dear. You're not thinking clearly. The only thing I'm upset about is that it took me 13 years to realize my worth. You taught me that I was expendable. I'm here to teach you the same lesson. I left them sitting in their empty apartment with no furniture, no appliances, and no means to maintain the lifestyle they'd grown accustomed to on my dime. For the first time in over a decade, I felt free. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. Anna Reed's investigation uncovered not just Mark's affair, but years of financial deception. Ben Carter proved as skilled as his reputation suggested. Because I'd been the primary breadwinner and had financial control over their living situation, I had significant leverage. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. I kept my retirement accounts, my car, and all the personal property I'd reclaimed. Mark kept his credit card debt and responsibility for his family's housing. Jake and Chloe's relationship didn't survive the stress. When Chloe realized her future in-laws were broke and Jake had no prospects, she moved back with her parents. Jake now sees his son only on weekends and struggles with child support. Eleanor, faced with the reality that her son couldn't support her, eventually moved into a Medicaid-accepting senior facility. Mark's relationship with Jessica ended when she realized his executive lifestyle had been financed by a wife he'd driven away. Last I heard, he was living in a Queens studio and working retail. As for me, I bought a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in Brooklyn Heights with a Manhattan skyline view. I decorated it entirely to my taste, filled it with books and plants and artwork that makes me happy. Ben Carter and I have been seeing each other for 6 months. He's kind, respectful, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings. It's amazing what a difference it makes to be with someone who actually likes you as a person. I've reconnected with old friends, taken up painting, joined a book club, and started traveling. The pharmaceutical company promoted me to senior staff pharmacist last month. I'm making more money than ever and spending it entirely on myself and causes I care about. Sometimes people ask if I regret how things ended, if I feel guilty about leaving Mark's family in difficult circumstances. I regret wasting 13 years trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it, but I don't regret finally standing up for myself. Eleanor used to tell me that real family sticks together through anything. She was right. But real family also treats each other with respect, kindness, and appreciation. Real family lifts each other up rather than tearing each other down. I spent over a decade trying to force my way into a family that didn't want me, not realizing I deserved to be part of a family that actually appreciated my presence. Now I'm building that family from scratch, choosing people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide. My name is Emily Jenkins, and I am no longer anyone's victim. I am the author of my own story, the architect of my own happiness, and the defender of my own worth. It took me 13 years to learn that lesson, but I'll never forget it again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting back at people who've wronged you. Sometimes the best revenge is building a life so beautiful and fulfilling that their absence becomes a gift rather than a loss. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be small anymore. I was 40 when I finally learned to put myself first. Now, at 41, I'm discovering that life actually begins when you stop accepting less than you deserve and start demanding the love, respect, and appreciation you've always been worthy of receiving.